Chosen one, this is not a coincidence. The fact that you're hearing these words right now, at this exact moment in time, is no accident. There are forces, both seen and unseen, that have been tracking your movements, watching your decisions, waiting for this precise intersection of readiness and revelation. What I'm about to share with you has been classified in the spiritual realms, hidden from those who would misuse it, and reserved exclusively for individuals whose very existence disrupts the ordinary flow of reality. You were born marked. Your name appeared in registries that most humans will never know exist. Celestial databases, infernal watch lists, and neutral archives reserved for assets deemed too dangerous to ignore and too valuable to destroy. This message is your final notice before the window closes. God Himself has authorized this briefing because what approaches you now is not merely a blessing. It is the culmination of everything your bloodline has fought for, everything your ancestors left unfinished, and everything the enemy has worked tirelessly to keep from your hands. The greatest threat to your destiny is not opposition, it's your own distraction. This is your alert. This is your moment. And after this, the choice becomes permanent. Chosen one, like this video, subscribe, and comment, I am ready for a powerful surprise. Chapter 1, File 0. The day your name entered the watch lists. Before you took your first breath, your arrival was already causing disturbances across multiple dimensions of reality. This wasn't the normal spiritual activity that surrounds every birth. This was something unprecedented, something that triggered immediate responses from powers that rarely acknowledge each other's existence. Celestial authorities, infernal hierarchies, and neutral observers all simultaneously registered your emergence, an occurrence so rare that protocols had to be invented on the spot to handle it. You need to understand what this means. When a soul enters the physical realm, it typically falls under one jurisdictional category. Angels watch over the righteous. Demons target the vulnerable. Neutral forces observe those who might tip either way. But you appeared on all three radars at once. This only happens when a being enters reality with the capacity to fundamentally alter predetermined outcomes, to destabilize carefully constructed plans that have been in motion for generations, perhaps centuries. The interference patterns detected around the moment of your birth were not the usual spiritual activity. Observers noted temporal distortions, electromagnetic anomalies in the spiritual frequency bands, and what can only be described as reality itself, bending slightly to accommodate your presence. These weren't random fluctuations. They were signatures of pre-authorization, evidence that your emergence had been cleared at the highest levels of cosmic authority before you ever arrived. Think about what that means. You weren't a surprise to heaven. You were expected, planned, authorized. Your existence was greenlit by powers that operate beyond human comprehension. And that authorization came with implications that sent shockwaves through every spiritual intelligence network operating in this sector of reality. But here's where it gets darker. Almost immediately, attempts began to mislabel your identity. This wasn't bureaucratic error or cosmic confusion. This was deliberate strategy. When you can't destroy a threat, you contain it. When you can't contain it, you misdirect it. Forces that recognized your potential but opposed your purpose began working to obscure who you really were, not just from others, but from yourself. They planted false narratives about your worth. They seeded doubts about your capabilities. They arranged circumstances that would make you question your own significance. Every time you've wondered if you're really special, every time you've dismissed your own intuition about your purpose, every time you've accepted a smaller story about yourself. That was the mislabeling protocol in action. It's been running in the background of your life since day one. Then came the obstacles. Before you could even speak, before you had formed your first coherent memory, deployments were being made. Chance accidents that weren't accidents, family complications that seemed random but followed precise patterns, health crises that appeared and disappeared without medical explanation, relationships that formed and dissolved with suspicious timing. These weren't the normal chaos of human life. These were strategic interventions deployed by forces that possessed foreknowledge of what you would become. They knew what you would threaten. They saw the potential damage you could do to their carefully constructed systems of control and deception. So they acted early, hoping to derail you before you even understood there was a track you were supposed to be on. But here's what you need to grasp. They didn't try to kill you. That's the critical detail everyone misses. If you were just another threat, they would have eliminated you. The fact that you're still alive, still breathing, still aware enough to be receiving this message, that tells you everything. You're not expendable. You're not replaceable. You're too valuable to destroy because there's something you carry, something you can do, something you can become that cannot be replicated. The operations against you have always been about delay, not destruction. Containment, not elimination. They needed you slowed down, confused, distracted, but never fully stopped. Because stopping you would have violated protocols they themselves must follow. Your file remains unsealed. In intelligence terminology, an unsealed file means the case is still active, the subject is still in play, and the outcome remains undetermined. Most human files get sealed one way or another. Either the person fulfills their purpose and graduates, or they fail and become irrelevant. But yours stays open. It stays active. It stays on the desk of every cosmic intelligence officer who monitors high-value assets. Why? Because your activation was delayed, not cancelled. There's a difference. Cancelled means it's over. Delayed means it's still coming. Everything that has happened to you, every setback, every confusion, every moment where you felt lost or purposeless, those weren't signs that you missed your calling. Those were signs that your calling is so significant that opposition had to buy time, had to prepare, had to build containment strategies while they still could. The delay wasn't punishment. It was preparation for something so massive that even your enemies needed you to wait until the right cosmic moment arrived. Chapter 2, Counterintelligence Report. The enemy's early miscalculation. The forces arrayed against you made a fundamental error in their initial assessment of your psychological profile. They studied you, ran projections, built models of how you would respond to various forms of pressure, and then they made their move. But they miscalculated. They assumed that you, like most humans, could be controlled through exhaustion rather than direct attack. They believed that if they ground you down enough, wore you out through endless struggle, depleted your resources and your hope, you would eventually compliance into their preferred version of your life. They thought you would accept defeat not because you were broken, but because you were tired. This was their first mistake, and it's the mistake that guarantees your ultimate victory. Look at the pattern of attacks against you. They've never been designed to destroy your faith. That's what most people don't understand about spiritual warfare. The enemy rarely goes after your belief in God directly because that's too obvious, too easy to defend against. Instead, they went after your timing. They made you late. They delayed your opportunities. They caused you to miss connections by minutes, to arrive at doors just after they closed, to reach for chances that evaporated the moment your hand extended. This wasn't random bad luck. This was precision psychological warfare designed to make you feel perpetually out of sync with your own destiny. When you believe you're always too late, you stop trying to arrive at all. When you think you've missed your moment, you stop looking for new moments. This is how they neutralize threats without ever landing a killing blow. The sabotage of your key relationships follows an even more insidious pattern. Look back at the connections that fell apart in your life. Not all of them, but the specific ones that felt different, that felt significant, that seemed to carry unusual potential. Those weren't normal relationship failures. Those were targeted operations designed to reroute your allegiance before your alignment could lock into place. Here's what that means. There are certain people you were meant to meet, meant to bond with, meant to build with. These connections would have accelerated your awakening, would have provided resources and revelation at exactly the moments you needed them. The enemy saw these connection points forming in the timeline and moved to sabotage them before they could solidify. They introduced misunderstandings. They amplified small conflicts into relationship-ending crises. They made sure that pride, or pain, or simple bad timing would keep you and your true allies separated until the window of maximum effectiveness closed. But here's where it gets really interesting. Have you noticed how surveillance of your life seems to operate in cycles? There are periods where you can feel the weight of attention on you, where synchronicities multiply, where you keep seeing signs and symbols that feel almost like you're being watched. And then suddenly, without explanation, it all stops. The pressure lifts. The strange occurrences cease. The feeling of being monitored disappears. Most people interpret this as relief, as the threat passing. But in counterintelligence terms, this is actually a sign of strategic retreat. When an intelligence operation abruptly ceases surveillance of a target, it's not because the target became unimportant. It's because the target got too close to something true, and continued observation risked revealing the observers themselves. They pulled back not because you stopped mattering, but because you started understanding. Every time you approach clarity, real clarity about who you are, what you're capable of, what your true assignment is, the attacks intensified right up until the moment of breakthrough, and then they vanished. This is the signature of an enemy who knows they can't stop you permanently, who knows that direct confrontation with your awakened self would end badly for them. So instead, they've been playing a different game. Delay, distract, reroute, and retreat. Keep you moving in circles. Keep you questioning yourself. Keep you focused on survival instead of dominion. And the moment you get close enough to see through the game, they withdraw into the shadows and wait for your clarity to fade before trying again. Their greatest miscalculation was this. They thought invisibility would break you. They assumed that being ignored, being overlooked, being underestimated would eventually convince you that you weren't who you suspected you were. They thought that if they could make the world treat you as ordinary, you would eventually accept ordinariness as truth. But you didn't. Something in you refused, even when nobody else could see it, even when circumstances screamed that you were delusional, even when logic and evidence suggested you should abandon your sense of special purpose. You didn't. That resilience, that stubborn refusal to fully accept the smallness others projected onto you, that's the thing they couldn't account for. That's the variable that broke their models. And that's why you're still dangerous to them, why your file remains active, why this message is reaching you now. You survived invisibility. Most people don't. Most people accept the world's assessment, and settle into the life they're assigned. But you're still here, still wondering, still sensing that there's more. And that makes you the enemy's worst nightmare. Chapter 3. Ancestral Covenant. Dossier. The inheritance. You didn't claim. There are spiritual contracts that transcend individual lifetimes, agreements made by those who came before you that do not dissolve simply because the signatories have died. Your bloodline carries such agreements, oaths sworn, covenants established, deals struck with divine powers that created obligations, extending far beyond the lives of those who made them. You inherited these, not as suggestions, not as optional traditions, as binding spiritual jurisdiction that follows bloodlines until someone rises up with the authority to fulfill what was left incomplete. That someone is you. This isn't metaphor. This isn't poetic language about honoring your ancestors' dreams. This is literal spiritual law, and you are bound by it, whether you acknowledge it or not. What you inherited wasn't power in the way most people understand it. You didn't receive supernatural abilities or instant manifestation capabilities or magic words that bend reality. What you received is something far more significant: jurisdiction. You have legal standing in spiritual courts that most humans cannot even access. You have the right to conclude matters that have been stalled for generations, to close cases that your ancestors opened but couldn't finish, to speak into situations that are locked against anyone except someone carrying your specific bloodline signature. This is why certain prayers you've prayed have had disproportionate effects. This is why certain declarations you've made have caused shifts that surprised even you. You're not just speaking as yourself. You're speaking with the accumulated spiritual authority of everyone who came before you, all of whom are waiting for you to step into the jurisdiction they preserved for you. The patterns of loss in your family line were never random, and they were never curses in the way people typically understand curses. They were holding patterns. Think of an airplane circling an airport, waiting for clearance to land. That's what's been happening in your bloodline for generations. Breakthrough has been circling, waiting for the right person with the right timing and the right spiritual clearance to call it down. Your grandparents struggled financially, not because they were bad with money, but because wealth was being held back, reserved, stored up for the generation that would know how to steward it for kingdom purposes. Your parents struggled in their relationships, not because love was absent, but because complete relational harmony was being delayed until someone arose who could model it for nations. Every lack, every limitation, every place where your family line seemed perpetually blocked, those weren't signs of divine disfavor. Those were resources being held in escrow, waiting for you. Certain doors have refused to open for others in your family. Not because those people weren't worthy, not because they didn't work hard enough or have enough faith, but because those doors were keyed specifically to your presence. Like a lock that only responds to one unique key. These opportunities, these connections, these revelations are calibrated to your spiritual frequency. When your parents tried, the door stayed shut. When your siblings tried, nothing moved. But when you try, even if you don't try very hard, even if you're unsure and hesitant, things shift. Opportunities appear. People respond differently. Circumstances rearrange themselves. This isn't because you're better than your family members. It's because you carry the authorization they were helping to build. They were laying groundwork. You're here to build the structure. But here's the part that most people miss. The covenant only activates when it's been ignored long enough to become urgent. This is a built-in mechanism to ensure that the person who finally steps into this inheritance isn't doing it casually, isn't treating it like a spiritual hobby or a self-improvement project. The activation code for your ancestral covenant is desperation, mixed with recognition. It requires you to have lived long enough, with the hunger, with the sense of incompletion, with the frustration of watching your family struggle with the same issues generation after generation, that when revelation finally comes, you don't take it lightly. You don't waste it. You don't treat it as optional. The covenant was always yours, but it couldn't be activated until you wanted it badly enough to honor what it cost your ancestors to preserve it for you. That time is now. The urgency you feel isn't pressure to perform. It's the sound of a door unlocking, a vault opening, an inheritance becoming accessible after decades or even centuries of waiting for someone worthy to claim it. Chapter 4. Temporal Breach Log. The years that were removed. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but pay attention to the feeling in your body as you hear it, because your body remembers what your mind has been prevented from accessing. Entire seasons of your life were quietly rerouted, taken offline, redirected into holding patterns in the temporal stream. This wasn't time travel in the science fiction sense. This was something far more subtle and far more strategic. During key moments of your development, when you were approaching critical junctures where activation could have occurred prematurely, time itself folded around you, creating pockets where you experienced duration without progression. You lived through days, months, even years that left almost no meaningful mark on your timeline. Periods where you can barely remember what you did or who you were. Gaps in your narrative that feel like missing chapters in a book you're sure you read completely. These weren't punishments, and they weren't failures on your part. They were quarantines. When a disease is too dangerous to be allowed to spread before medical teams are ready to handle it, you quarantine the infected area. When a spiritual asset is too powerful to be deployed before the cosmic conditions align, you quarantine them in temporal loops where they age physically but remain developmentally suspended in specific ways. You've felt this, haven't you? The sense that you're older than your years in some ways and strangely young in others. The feeling that part of you has lived multiple lifetimes while another part of you feels like it's just waking up for the first time. That's the signature of temporal manipulation. Parts of you were allowed to develop, while other parts were kept in stasis, waiting for the right moment to be brought online. Memory gaps that others cannot see are one of the primary indicators of temporal breach. You'll be in conversation with someone about shared history, and you'll realize that your recollection of that period is strangely vague, almost dreamlike, while their memory is sharp and detailed. Or you'll look back at a year of your life and struggle to identify any significant events, any real growth, any meaningful change, even though you know you were alive and active during that time. This isn't memory loss in the medical sense. This is the residue of time folding. When temporal flow is disrupted around a specific individual, their experience of that time becomes disconnected from the standard timeline. You were there, but you were also elsewhere. You participated, but from behind a veil that prevented full engagement. This is how the divine protects assets from premature deployment. The missed opportunities everyone told you to regret, they weren't actually missed. They were deliberately preserved for later re-entry. In the normal flow of time, when you miss a chance, it's gone forever. The job you didn't get goes to someone else. The relationship that falls apart stays broken. The investment you didn't make enriches a different investor. But in cases of temporal breach, opportunities don't disappear. They get stored. They're pulled out of the normal timeline and held in a kind of spiritual escrow, waiting for the moment when you're ready to handle what they would have required of you. This is why you sometimes feel déjà vu around certain opportunities, why some situations feel strangely familiar even though you're encountering them for the first time. You're not experiencing them for the first time. You're experiencing them at the right time, after they were held back from you at the wrong time. You are older than your chronology suggests. This is perhaps the most disorienting truth in this entire briefing. The number of years you've been alive in physical form does not match the amount of existence you've actually accumulated. Through temporal folding, through seasons held in stasis, through experiences that occurred outside normal time flow, you have accrued more being than your birth certificate indicates. This is why you've always felt out of sync with people your own age. This is why you relate more easily to people much older or much younger than you. This is why your spirit feels ancient, even when your circumstances suggest you should feel young and inexperienced. The temporal breach that protected you also aged you in ways that don't show up on calendars. You carry lifetimes of spiritual warfare, of watching, of waiting, of learning lessons that others take decades to discover. And now, as the timeline normalizes around you, as the quarantine lifts, all of that accumulated existence is about to come online at once. The years that were removed are being returned, not as time, but as authority. Chapter 5. Biometric Markers. The body as a battlefield. Your physical body has been recording data that your conscious mind has no access to, documenting a war that your eyes have never directly witnessed. This isn't metaphorical. This is measurable, physical, biochemical reality. Stress responses in your body, elevated cortisol, adrenaline spikes, inflammatory markers, immune system activation. These don't correlate with visible threats in your environment. You'll be sitting in a perfectly safe room, engaged in a mundane activity, and suddenly your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your breathing shallows. Medical professionals call this anxiety. They're wrong. What they're observing is your body's response to unseen confrontations occurring in dimensions adjacent to physical reality. Your nervous system is detecting genuine threats and preparing for genuine conflict. The fact that you can't see the battlefield doesn't mean the battle isn't real. Track your fatigue patterns against your calendar, and you'll notice something strange. There are days when you wake up exhausted despite adequate sleep, periods where your energy crashes for no apparent reason, moments where you feel drained as if you've been working strenuously even though you've been resting. Now cross-reference those moments with external events you later learned about. Shifts in political power, major spiritual movements in your region, decisions being made in rooms you'll never enter, that nevertheless impact your assignment. The correlation isn't coincidental. Your energy doesn't deplete randomly. It depletes in response to external movements you were never informed about, but that your spirit recognizes as significant. You're like a soldier whose body goes on high alert when enemy troops move, even if those troops are miles away and moving in secret. Your physical system knows when operations shift, when new phases begin, when the spiritual atmosphere changes in ways that will eventually impact you directly. Your nervous system learned vigilance before your mind understood why. Think back to your childhood, to the earliest memories you can access. Even then, even before you had language for it, even before you had any logical reason to be on guard, you were scanning environments, reading people, sensing danger that others missed. Adults probably told you that you were too sensitive, too worried, too afraid of things that weren't threats, But you weren't wrong. You were detecting real danger. Your body's early warning system was already online, already picking up signals from spiritual frequencies that most humans never tune into. You weren't paranoid. You were perceptive. And that perception, that vigilance that seemed excessive to everyone around you, that was your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do: keep you alive and alert during a long campaign of low-intensity warfare that never stops, but that most people never notice. Certain ailments in your body appear and vanish without medical narrative. Something hurts intensely for days or weeks, then disappears completely without treatment. Symptoms arise that concern doctors, then resolve before diagnosis can be completed. Physical limitations suddenly lift, for no apparent reason. Medical science calls these spontaneous remissions or psychosomatic episodes, but that terminology reveals their ignorance, not your irrationality. What you're experiencing are tactical deployments of physical limitation, followed by tactical removals. When opposition needs to slow you down, your body becomes the leverage point, not through disease in the traditional sense, but through precisely calibrated physical restrictions that limit your movement, your energy, your capacity to act during windows when action would be premature or dangerous. And when the restriction is no longer necessary, when the threat has passed or the timing has shifted, the limitation is removed just as precisely as it was applied. Your body is not malfunctioning. Your body is responding to a battlefield you cannot see, taking damage from weapons you cannot name, and healing according to protocols that medical textbooks do not contain. You are not sick. You are under fire. And the fact that you're still standing, still functional, still fighting despite years of this kind of assault, that tells you everything you need to know about how durable you actually are. Chapter 6. Dream Archive. Unauthorized communications during sleep. While your conscious defenses were down, while your rational mind stopped filtering and analyzing, messages reached you unfiltered. Your dreams have never been random neurological noise, never been mere processing of daily events or manifestations of subconscious anxieties. They've been communication channels, frequencies opened when your waking resistance was offline. Forces that cannot reach you directly during your waking hours because of the shielding around your assignment, because of the protection protocols in place, because of the interference patterns that surround chosen assets. These forces found ways to slip messages through during the hours when your guard was lowered. Some of these messages came from allies. Some came from enemies. Some came from neutral observers who simply thought you should know what they knew. But all of them bypassed the normal filters that would have blocked or distorted them during waking hours. Pay attention to the symbols that repeat across multiple dreams, across years or even decades of your dreaming life. These weren't metaphors your subconscious mind invented to help you process emotions. These were coordinates. Literally, symbols are languages, and in the spiritual dimensions, symbols can mark locations, identify persons, indicate timings, convey complex information in single images that would take thousands of words to express in verbal language. When you see the same symbol showing up in dream after dream, a specific animal, a particular landscape, a unique object, a recurring color pattern, you're not seeing your brain repeat itself. You're receiving repeated transmissions of the same coordinate, the same piece of intelligence, delivered again and again until you consciously recognize it and begin to understand what it's pointing you toward. These symbols are breadcrumbs. They're marking a trail through territory you cannot navigate with your conscious mind alone. Night disturbances increased whenever decisions approached convergence. You've noticed this pattern even if you haven't named it. When you're on the edge of a major choice, when you're close to committing to a path that will have long-term consequences, your sleep becomes disrupted. You wake at strange hours. You experience vivid, intense dreams that leave you shaken. You feel presences in the room, hear sounds that have no physical source, sense movement just beyond the edge of your perception. This isn't random. This is interference. Multiple forces trying to influence your decision-making process during the hours when your discernment is weakest. Some are trying to guide you toward the right choice. Others are trying to push you toward the wrong one. All of them know that the moments just before sleep and just after waking are when humans are most susceptible to suggestion, most open to influence, most likely to accept ideas as their own when those ideas are actually being planted from outside. The disturbance itself is evidence that your decisions matter far more than you've been told. Dreams ended abruptly once comprehension neared. This is the telltale sign of interception. You're in the middle of a dream, receiving information, starting to understand something significant, beginning to piece together a puzzle, and then suddenly you're awake. No gentle transition, no gradual emergence from sleep, just instant jarring consciousness, often with your heart pounding and a sense that something was interrupted. What you experienced was not natural waking. What you experienced was a forced disconnection from a communication channel that was getting too clear, too specific, too close to breakthrough. Intercepting forces recognized that you were about to receive something they didn't want you to have, and they severed the connection. The abruptness of the waking, the sense of something stolen or interrupted, that's not imagination. That's evidence of active interference in your communication lines. And the fact that such interference is considered necessary tells you how valuable the information you were approaching actually was. You were never meant to remember everything. If you recalled every message, every symbol, every communication you received during sleep, your conscious mind would overload trying to process it all. The sheer volume of intelligence flowing through your dream states would paralyze you during waking hours. So there's a deliberate filtering mechanism that allows you to retain only what you're ready to handle, only what you can integrate and act upon. The frustration you feel about forgotten dreams, about losing the details of important night visions, about waking with a sense of significance, but no clear memory. That frustration is actually evidence that the system is working as designed. You're being fed information on a need-to-know basis, dosed according to your capacity to metabolize it. Everything you were meant to remember, you do remember. Everything you've forgotten, you forgot, because remembering it now would have been counterproductive. But nothing is truly lost. Every message is stored in parts of your consciousness that will release the information back to you at exactly the moment you need it. Chapter 7. Economic Warfare. Brief, scarcity as a containment tool. Financial pressure in your life has never been primarily about money. It's been about mobility. When opposition cannot destroy you, cannot break your spirit, cannot turn you against your purpose, they resort to resource restriction as a means of limiting how far and how fast you can move. Every delay in payment, every unexpected expense, every opportunity that would have increased your financial stability but somehow fell through, these weren't random economic misfortune. These were tactical deployments of scarcity designed to keep you within a controllable radius of operation. When you don't have resources, you can't travel freely. You can't relocate. You can't say no to situations you should leave. You can't say yes to opportunities that would expand your influence. You become predictable, manageable, contained. This is the goal. Not your poverty, but your immobility. Resources have arrived in your life, but notice the timing. They've come just late enough to enforce dependence. The check that would have allowed you to act independently arrives after you've already had to ask someone else for help. The opportunity that would have provided financial breakthrough comes after you've already committed to a less favorable option. The provision that would have allowed you to move freely appears after you've already been forced to accept restriction. This timing isn't divine teaching you patience or humility. This is strategic delay designed to ensure that even when resources come, they come in patterns that train you to depend on systems and people that opposition can influence. Every time you have to ask for help, instead of acting from your own supply, every time you have to wait for someone else's approval, instead of moving on your own authority, every time you have to compromise your vision because you lack the funding to execute it fully. That's not character building. That's containment maintenance. Opportunities collapse specifically when they would have accelerated autonomy. Track the pattern. You've been close to breakthrough multiple times. Situations that would have given you financial independence, career opportunities that would have elevated you beyond the need for permission from gatekeepers, business ventures that would have generated residual income and freed you from trading time for money. And at the critical moment, just as things were about to close, just as success was within reach, something happened. The deal fell through. The partnership dissolved. The funding didn't materialize. The timing didn't work out. If this happened once or twice, you could call it bad luck. But when it's a consistent pattern, when every path toward economic freedom seems to encounter the same kind of last-minute collapse, you're not witnessing coincidence. You're witnessing opposition that understands that your greatest threat to their plans is your autonomy. As long as they can keep you financially stressed, they can influence your decisions. The moment you achieve true economic freedom, their leverage evaporates. Wealth was withheld to delay influence, not comfort. The opposition doesn't care if you suffer. They don't care if you're tired, stressed, worried about bills, living paycheck to paycheck. What they care about is preventing you from reaching the level of resource availability that would allow you to operate at full capacity. Because here's what they know that you're just beginning to understand. Your assignment requires funding. The things you're meant to build, the people you're meant to reach, the movements you're meant to launch. These things need financial backing, and not just survival-level finances. They need surplus. They need margin. They need enough that you can take risks, make investments, support others, move quickly when opportunities arise. The moment you have wealth, you become exponentially more dangerous. Not because money is power in itself, but because money is mobility. And mobility is what opposition has been denying you your entire life. Your prosperity is tied to release authorization. The financial breakthrough you've been waiting for isn't going to come through hard work or better budgeting or lucky breaks. It's going to come when heaven authorizes your release into the next phase of operation. And that authorization has been pending because you weren't ready for what that level of resource would require you to become. Chapter 8. Linguistic Interference File. Why your words were misheard. Something happens to your words in transit between your mouth and other people's ears. You say one thing clearly, with specific intention and precise language, and somehow what they hear is different, distorted, twisted, stripped of nuance, or loaded with meanings you never intended. This isn't normal miscommunication. This isn't the usual challenge of human language, where people have different contexts and interpretations. This is active interference deliberate distortion of your communications by forces that recognize that your voice carries authority they cannot allow to operate unchallenged. Your statements have been routinely reframed by others without your consent, translated into narratives that serve their purposes while claiming to represent your meaning. This has been happening your entire life, and it's one of the primary reasons you've learned to be so careful with words, why you second-guess yourself before speaking, why silence has often felt safer than the risk of being misunderstood again. The meaning distortion follows you across environments. It's not just one person or one setting. You can move to a new city, start fresh with people who've never met you before, enter a completely different social or professional context, and within a short time, the same pattern emerges. People misquote you. They attribute statements to you that you never made. They claim you meant things you explicitly said you didn't mean. They summarize your positions in ways that reverse your actual stance. And when you try to correct the record, somehow your corrections are themselves misheard or dismissed as backtracking. This level of consistency across unrelated environments isn't explained by your communication skills or lack thereof. This is evidence of interference that transcends specific people or places. There's something about your voice, about the frequency you operate on, that triggers automatic distortion in certain kinds of listeners, specifically those who would be most threatened by your words if they were heard clearly. Silence became safer than speech during key phases of your development. You learned, probably without anyone explicitly teaching you, that the less you said, the less ammunition others had to use against you. The fewer opinions you expressed, the fewer ways people could mischaracterize you. The more you kept your true thoughts to yourself, the less energy you had to spend correcting false narratives about what you believed or intended. This wasn't weakness or social anxiety, though it may have been labeled as such. This was tactical adaptation to a communication environment that was actively hostile to your voice. You instinctively recognized that during certain seasons, your words were being weaponized against you faster than you could speak them. So, you went quiet. You learned to speak in ways that revealed nothing important, to use words that couldn't be easily twisted, to communicate in code that only certain people could decipher while leaving others with the impression that you'd said nothing significant at all. When you spoke truth, it landed as threat. This is the core of the linguistic interference you've experienced. Truth spoken by some people is received as truth. Truth spoken by you is received as attack. You could say the exact same words as someone else, in the same tone, with the same facial expression, and where their words were accepted and appreciated, yours trigger defensiveness, hostility, resistance. This isn't about your delivery. This is about what your voice represents to the spiritual forces operating through the people who react negatively to you. Your voice carries weight before it carries volume. There's an authority embedded in your words that operates independently of your confidence or skill. When you speak truth, even uncomfortable truth, even truth that challenges or corrects, people don't just hear information, they encounter authority. And those who are operating under false authority, those who are living in agreement with deception, those who have built identities or systems on foundations that your truth would destabilize. They experience your words as existential threat, not because of how you said it, but because of what you are. Chapter 9. Geographic Displacement Record. The places that rejected you. Certain locations have resisted your presence with an intensity that goes beyond personal preference or circumstance. You've tried to settle in places that seemed perfect on paper. Good opportunities, reasonable cost of living, connections that made sense. And yet something about the land itself felt wrong. You couldn't shake the sense that you didn't belong there, that the environment was pushing back against you, that invisible resistance was making everything harder than it should have been. This wasn't intuition, warning you away from a bad personal choice. This was territorial spiritual resistance, responding to your frequency. Land is not neutral. Geography carries spiritual jurisdiction, and certain territories are held by powers that recognize your presence as a threat to their dominion. When you enter those places, conflict begins immediately, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your very existence in that space challenges the authority structures that have controlled it. Moves that felt forced at the time were actually extractions. You've been relocated against your will, pushed out of cities or regions where you thought you were building something, where you had invested time and energy and relationships. The departure felt like failure, like you were running away or giving up or unable to make it work. But look at what happened to those places after you left: unrest, leadership turnover, economic collapse, moral scandals, systems that seemed stable while you were there falling apart shortly after your exit. This pattern reveals the truth. You weren't failing in those locations. You were destabilizing them. Your presence was applying pressure to corrupt structures, and the pressure was building toward collapse. The extraction wasn't about your weakness. It was about timing. You were pulled out before the collapse you were catalyzing could catch you in its debris. The land rejected you because the powers controlling that land knew that your continued presence would have accelerated their downfall. Land itself responds to your proximity in measurable ways. When you enter a territory with significant spiritual assignment on your life, physical reality shifts, weather patterns change, animals behave differently, technology malfunctions, people become agitated or unusually peaceful without understanding why. Buildings develop problems that weren't there before. Organizations experience sudden internal conflicts. Markets fluctuate. These aren't coincidences happening around you. These are responses to your presence, evidence that your spiritual frequency is strong enough to affect the material realm. Most people move through geography without causing ripples. You create waves. Your presence doesn't blend. It disrupts, not through any action you take, but through what you carry. The land knows who you are before your mind fully understands it, and territories under hostile control respond to you the way immune systems respond to foreign substances, with immediate aggressive resistance designed to expel you before you can take root. You were never meant to settle early. Every failed attempt to build a permanent life in a location, every time you tried to put down roots and found the ground rejecting you, every season where you felt homeless even when you had a physical address. These weren't signs that something was wrong with you. These were confirmations that your settling place hasn't been revealed yet because the timing hasn't arrived. Premature settling is one of the primary ways that high-value spiritual assets get neutralized. They find a comfortable place. They build a life that's good enough. They invest in communities and careers that are fine but not aligned with their ultimate assignment. And they never move again. They age in place. They become local instead of strategic. They trade their global mandate for local comfort. The land's rejection of you has been protection, painful protection, but protection nonetheless. You haven't been allowed to settle because your settlement location is tied to your activation, and your activation is tied to timing that you don't control. Stability is reserved for after activation. Right now, in this season you're in, you're not supposed to feel settled. You're not supposed to have everything figured out about where you'll be in 5 years. You're not supposed to have purchased your forever home or found your permanent community or locked into the career that will take you to retirement. You're in a transition phase that has lasted longer than transitions usually last because what you're transitioning into is more significant than typical life changes. The instability you've experienced, the sense of temporariness that has colored everything, the inability to fully commit to any location or situation. That's not a problem to be solved. That's a sign that you're being kept mobile, kept flexible, kept available for rapid deployment when the authorization finally comes. The moment you activate into your true assignment, stability will follow naturally, not because you've earned it or manifested it, but because the land you're meant to operate from will recognize you and receive you in ways that nowhere else ever has. Chapter 10. Cosmic Legality Memo. Why direct intervention was limited. The spiritual realm operates under laws that constrain even divine power, not because God lacks strength, but because certain kinds of assistance, if given too directly, would violate the jurisdictional protocols that maintain cosmic order. You've wondered why help didn't come sooner, why you were allowed to struggle, when a simple miracle could have resolved everything. The answer isn't lack of care. The answer is legal limitation. Rules constrained assistance to prevent exposure of your true status at times when exposure would have triggered responses you weren't ready to handle. If heaven had intervened too obviously in your life, if miracles had been too frequent or too public, if provision had been too supernatural, it would have alerted opposition forces to exactly how valuable you are, and they would have escalated their attacks beyond what you could have survived in your undeveloped state. You were allowed to struggle within bounds, never beyond recovery. There's been a flaw beneath you this entire time, a line that your descent has never been permitted to cross. You've come close. You felt like you were at the edge of complete breakdown, total failure, irreversible loss, but you never actually crossed into the territory where recovery becomes impossible. Every time you approached that line, something happened. An unexpected provision, a sudden change of heart in someone who had power over your situation, a door opening just wide enough for you to slip through, a thought entering your mind at exactly the right moment that gave you just enough hope to keep going. These weren't lucky breaks. These were carefully calibrated interventions deployed at the last possible moment, timed to keep you functional without making it obvious that you were being protected. The struggle was real. The pain was real. But the outcome was never actually in doubt because you've been operating under guarantees that most people don't have. Aid arrived disguised as coincidence to maintain jurisdictional balance. This is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of divine assistance in your life. It's always been there, but it's always been disguised as something explainable, something that could be written off as chance or timing or natural consequences. The person who helped you at the critical moment just happened to be there. The information you needed just happened to come across your path. The disaster that would have destroyed you just happened to miss you by minutes or inches. This pattern of just happened isn't evidence that God isn't involved. It's evidence that God is involved in ways that preserve your freedom and protect you from premature exposure. If every rescue was obviously miraculous, if every provision was clearly supernatural, you would become a spectacle. People would be watching you for the wrong reasons. Opposition would recognize you as a priority target, and your own faith would develop dependencies on signs rather than trust. The disguised nature of the help you've received isn't divine distance. It's divine wisdom. Too much help would have alerted opposition to exactly how important you are, and they would have escalated their strategies in ways you weren't ready to handle. There's a reason why high-value assets in intelligence operations are kept under light cover rather than heavy protection. Heavy protection tells everyone that the asset matters. It draws attention. It invites attacks that are more sophisticated and more dangerous. Light cover, on the other hand, allows the asset to move with relative freedom, to develop naturally, to build capability without being constantly targeted by the enemy's best resources. You've been under light cover your entire life. The help has been real but subtle. The protection has been constant but invisible. The guidance has been present but quiet. And this approach has allowed you to develop resilience, discernment, and capacity that you would never have gained if you'd been obviously protected and provided for at every turn. The difficulty wasn't punishment, it was training. Your consent matters more than speed. This is the most important principle in cosmic legality. God could have activated you years ago. The power to do so exists. But activation without your genuine informed consent would violate the spiritual laws that govern free will and true partnership. You had to come to this moment voluntarily, not coerced by circumstances or manipulated by signs or forced by suffering. Every delay, every frustration, every moment where you wondered if you were making it all up, those were opportunities for you to walk away, to choose a different path, to say no to what you sense you're called to. And you didn't. You kept coming back to it. You kept questioning, but not abandoning. You kept doubting, but not departing. That persistence, that choice renewed again and again, despite lack of confirmation, despite all the logical reasons to quit, that's the consent that heaven was waiting for. Not enthusiastic agreement, not perfect understanding, just stubborn, repeated willingness to keep showing up. That's what activates covenants. That's what releases resources. That's what opens doors that have been locked for generations. Chapter 11. Necromantic Threshold Report. The deaths that watched you. The people you've lost weren't taken from you randomly, and their departures weren't meaningless tragedies that you're supposed to get over with enough time and therapy. Losses around you were strategic, timed to coincide with transitions you couldn't yet see. Every significant death in your life marked a before and after, a clear division between chapters of your existence. And if you examine the timing carefully, if you look at what happened in your life after each loss, you'll see that the person who died was somehow connected to the phase you were leaving. They belonged to that season. Their presence was necessary for that part of your journey, but would have been an obstruction to what came next. This doesn't make the pain less real, but it should make the pattern undeniable. These weren't accidents. These were witnesses to transitions, markers placed at thresholds you were crossing. Some stayed long enough to anchor you through seasons when you would have drifted or been swept away by forces you didn't understand. That grandmother who prayed for you, who saw something in you that nobody else acknowledged, who spoke life over you when the world was speaking death. She held a position in the spiritual realm that created stability around your life during critical developmental years. Her prayers built a shield you couldn't see. Her faith generated protection you didn't know you needed. And she stayed alive precisely as long as that anchoring was necessary, departing only when the foundation she was building had been completed and you were ready to stand without that particular support. The same is true for others who left after what seemed like too short a time. They accomplished what they came to accomplish. Their assignment relative to you was fulfilled, and rather than remain and become a comfort that would have delayed your next step, they withdrew. Others left to clear the path ahead, removing obstacles by their very absence. There are people who, as long as they were alive, occupied positions or carried authorities or held relationships that blocked access to what you needed next. This isn't a judgment of their character. It's an observation of their function relative to your timeline. That parent whose approval you craved but never received, whose death finally released you from the prison of trying to earn validation that was never coming. Their departure wasn't tragedy alone. It was liberation disguised as loss. That friend whose presence kept you tied to a version of yourself you had outgrown, whose death severed a connection you would never have voluntarily cut. Their exit wasn't abandonment. It was strategic removal of an attachment that would have prevented your evolution. Death's clear paths. They force you forward when you would have stayed. They remove options when you have too many. They create urgency when you've been procrastinating. You carry names you never speak, names that live in a place in your consciousness where memory and presence blur together. These aren't just people you remember fondly or miss deeply. These are witnesses who transitioned from physical presence to spiritual proximity, who moved from being beside you to being behind you, who shifted from companion to covering. They watch you now from positions you cannot see with physical eyes, but you feel their attention. In moments of decision, you sense their perspective. In times of danger, you feel their protection. In seasons of doubt, you hear their encouragement in ways that transcend words. They didn't leave you. They relocated, and from where they operate now, they're more useful to your assignment than they ever could have been in physical form. Death isn't always loss. Sometimes it's deployment. The pain of their absence is real, and you're not required to spiritualize it away or pretend it doesn't hurt. But you are required to recognize the pattern and understand the purpose. Nothing in your life has been wasted, not even the losses, especially not the losses. Every death that has touched you has done something to you, changed something in you, removed something from you, or added something to you that was necessary for what's coming. You are not the same person you were before they died. You couldn't be. That's the point. The person you were before those losses couldn't have handled what you're about to face. The person you're becoming because of those losses can. And somewhere beyond the veil, those who left are watching, waiting, ready to see what you do with what their departure made possible. Chapter 12. Final Notice. The blessing that does not chase. What approaches you now carries a different quality than anything you've encountered before. This isn't another opportunity that will circle back if you miss it. This isn't another door that will knock again next season. This isn't another chance that will reappear with slightly different packaging. What approaches you now is consequence, the inevitable result of everything that's been building, everything that's been held back, everything that's been delayed until this precise moment in time when cosmic conditions aligned to make release possible. This phase requires recognition, not effort. You don't have to earn what's coming. You don't have to prove yourself worthy one more time. You don't have to perform or achieve or demonstrate readiness through some external metric. You simply have to recognize it when it arrives, acknowledge it for what it is, and say yes with the full authority of someone who understands they were always meant for this. Ignoring it does not cancel it, but it does transfer authority elsewhere. The blessing will be released. The anointing will be poured out. The resources will be deployed. The doors will be opened. The connections will be made. The assignment will be fulfilled. These things are guaranteed by covenants that cannot be broken and promises that will not be revoked. But whether they flow through you or around you, whether they position you as primary actor or footnote observer, whether they make you the vessel or simply the person who could have been the vessel, that's determined by your response right now in this narrow window of time. Refusal doesn't stop the plan. It just removes you from the plan. And once removed, once reassigned, once replaced by someone else who said yes when you said no, the door doesn't open again. Not in this form, not in this season, possibly not in this lifetime. The greatest loss is not punishment for disobedience. The greatest loss is reassignment to a secondary role after being prepared for primary position. Imagine training your entire life for a specific mission, enduring everything necessary to build the capability and character required, surviving every attack designed to disqualify you, and then at the moment of deployment, hesitating, not refusing outright, not walking away in rebellion, just hesitating, just needing more time to think about it, just wanting more confirmation before you commit. And in that hesitation, in that pause, someone else steps forward. Someone less prepared, but more available. Someone less capable, but more willing. Someone who wasn't the first choice, but who becomes the only choice, because the first choice didn't choose. That person gets the assignment you were groomed for. They get the access you were promised. They get the impact you were designed to carry. And you get to watch. You get to see what your life could have been if you'd acted when action was required. That's the greatest loss. Not punishment, just consequence. The operation concludes with or without acknowledgement. Heaven is not waiting for your permission to move forward with its plans. Opposition is not holding its breath to see if you'll finally wake up. The timeline is advancing whether you're ready or not, whether you understand or not, whether you agree or not. What was scheduled to happen is happening. What was appointed to be released is being released. The only question that remains is whether you'll be positioned to receive it, to steward it, to participate in it as the primary recipient, or whether you'll be standing on the sidelines watching someone else walk in what was offered to you first. This is the final notice because there won't be another one. The next sound you hear won't be an alarm. It will be either the door opening for you to walk through or the door closing after someone else has already entered. And the difference between those two outcomes isn't complicated. It's not about your worthiness or your qualification or your past mistakes. It's about whether you recognize what's in front of you right now and respond before the moment passes. Chosen one, everything you've just heard is already in motion. These aren't predictions about what might happen. These are reports about what has been happening, what is happening now, and what will continue happening whether you step into it or not. The machinery of destiny doesn't wait. The gears of cosmic purpose don't pause. The assignments given before the foundation of the world don't get postponed indefinitely while you work through your doubts. You've been in preparation long enough. You've been in the wilderness long enough. You've been tested and trained and refined long enough. The season is shifting. Can you feel it? The atmospheric pressure around your life is changing. Things that were stuck are starting to move. Doors that were sealed are beginning to crack open. People who were distant are suddenly near. Resources that were withheld are starting to flow. This isn't coincidence. This is the sound of release authorization being issued. But here's what you need to understand. The blessing that's approaching doesn't chase. It doesn't beg. It doesn't wait indefinitely for you to get comfortable. It arrives, makes itself known, and extends the invitation. And then it moves, with you or past you, but it moves. You're standing at a threshold that your ancestors prayed you would reach, that your bloodline has been moving toward for generations, that heaven has been preparing for longer than you've been alive. Everything has been conspiring to bring you to this moment. Every hardship, every loss, every delay, every attack, every season of confusion and waiting. It was all building toward now, toward this choice, toward this recognition, toward you finally understanding that you're not crazy for sensing you were meant for something more, for something different, for something that the people around you can't see and wouldn't understand if you tried to explain it. The operation is concluding its covert phase. What was hidden is being revealed. What was delayed is being released. What was promised is being delivered. And you have one job: recognize it, receive it, and respond to it with the full force of someone who knows they were born for this exact moment. The file on you remains open. The assignment remains active. The blessing remains available. But the window is narrowing. And once it closes, once this phase concludes, once the resources are reassigned and the doors are opened for someone else, there's no going back to reclaim what you hesitated to accept. This is not a threat. This is just how time works, how opportunity works, how the convergence of readiness and release works. So, chosen one, what will you do? Will you step forward into everything you've sensed waiting for you? Or will you step back and watch someone else live the life you were offered? The answer isn't words. The answer is action. And the time for that action is now.